In the autumn of 1929, the American dream seemed untouchable. Factories roared, stocks soared, and optimism filled the air. Ordinary families, farmers, clerks, teachers, had become investors, convinced that prosperity was permanent. Radios sold on credit, skyscrapers climbed higher each month, and the ticker tape never stopped printing wealth. Then, almost overnight, the dream dissolved. On Wall Street, traders watched in disbelief as prices collapsed faster than they could shout their bids. Paper fortunes turned to ash. Bankers locked their doors. Fathers went home to tell their families that everything, savings, security, pride, was gone. It wasn't just money that vanished. It was faith, in progress, in industry, in the promise that hard work guaranteed a future. America hadn't been invaded or conquered. It had simply awakened from its illusion of endless growth. And when the dust settled, one truth echoed across the nation. The age of certainty was over. The 1920s were an age of speed, fast cars, fast profits, fast dreams. After World War I, America emerged as the richest nation on earth. Production soared, wages rose, and consumer credit made luxuries accessible to millions. The stock market became the new frontier, a symbol of national pride and personal ambition. Banks encouraged citizens to invest, newspapers celebrated every record high, and a generation believed they had discovered a formula for permanent prosperity. With margin loans, investors could buy $10,000 of stock with just $1,000 down. Profits multiplied until they didn't. Behind the glittering skyline of New York, cracks had already begun to form. Productivity outpaced wages, farmers were drowning in debt, and industrial output was far greater than what people could afford to buy. The boom was not built on value, it was built on leverage and hope. President Calvin Coolidge summed up the decade in one sentence: "The business of America is business." But by the end of 1929, business had become belief, and belief, like any currency, collapses when confidence runs out. The Roaring Twenties had been a celebration of risk. The hangover was about to begin. October 29th, 1929, a date that would haunt a generation. As the sun rose over Manhattan, thousands of investors flooded Wall Street, desperate to sell before the next plunge. The air was electric with fear. Ticker tapes fell behind by hours. Phones rang unanswered. Prices tumbled faster than brokers could shout. By the day's end, 16 million shares had changed hands, a record that shattered both the market and the nation's confidence. The Dow Jones lost nearly a quarter of its value in 2 days. Bankers formed emergency alliances, but it was too late. Panic had become contagion. Across the country, headlines screamed stock market in ruins. In cities from Chicago to Los Angeles, crowds gathered outside banks that no longer had the cash to reopen. Men in suits carried empty briefcases, symbols of vanished fortunes. Families huddled around radios, waiting for answers that never came. What began as a financial correction had turned into a psychological collapse. America didn't just lose money, it lost the illusion that progress was permanent. And while the stock market fell for 3 years, the faith that built it fell in a single week. The crash was only the spark. What followed was a slow suffocation. As panic spread, millions rushed to withdraw savings. Banks, already fragile from speculation, collapsed one by one. In 1930 alone, over 1,300 banks failed. Credit vanished. Businesses couldn't pay wages. Farmers couldn't borrow to plant, and factories fell silent. Prices tumbled across the economy. Falling demand led to layoffs. Layoffs killed consumption, and the vicious cycle deepened. Economists called it deflation. Workers called it despair. The Federal Reserve, fearing inflation, tightened credit instead of loosening it, turning recession into catastrophe. By 1933, the nation's output had fallen by nearly a third. 1 in 4 Americans was out of work. In industrial cities like Detroit and Pittsburgh, once busy streets turned to ghost towns. Farmers in the Midwest burned their crops because they couldn't sell them for more than the cost of transport. It wasn't just an economic collapse. It was a collapse of trust in banks, in government, in the system itself. Each closed factory and empty storefront told the same story. Prosperity had been borrowed, not earned. And when the bills came due, there was no one left to pay them. Statistics could not capture the silence of hunger. By 1932, bread lines stretched for blocks in every major city. Once proud businessmen stood beside laborers waiting for soup served by churches and charities. Families sold furniture, wedding rings, anything that could buy another week of survival. In the countryside, things were worse. Drought and over-farming turned the Great Plains into dust. The winds carried away not only crops but entire towns. Thousands packed their belongings into rusted trucks and headed west, chasing rumors of work in California. They became known simply as Okies. Children fainted in classrooms from malnutrition, mothers stitched coats from flour sacks, fathers disappeared in search of jobs that no longer existed. It was a quiet tragedy. No gunfire, no invasion, just a nation starving in peacetime. Photographers like Dorothea Lange captured their faces, tired, proud, unbroken. The Depression wasn't only about money, it was about dignity, the slow erosion of belief that tomorrow could still be better. Amid the dust and despair, one question lingered in every American home. If capitalism had failed, what would come next? In March 1933, a new voice crackled through the radio, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. "The only thing we have to fear," he said, "is fear itself." Those words marked the beginning of a revolution, not of ideology, but of faith. Roosevelt moved swiftly. He shut down every bank in the country for 4 days, forcing audits before reopening the solvent ones. The Emergency Banking Act restored a flicker of confidence. For the first time in years, deposits exceeded withdrawals. Then came the New Deal, a series of bold experiments meant to revive a broken nation. Public works programs like the WPA and CCC put millions to work building roads, bridges, and dams. The FDIC ensured savings. The SEC began policing Wall Street. Social Security offered the first safety net for the elderly and unemployed. Not every plan succeeded, but together they rewired the American economy. For the first time, the federal government became not just a regulator, but a lifeline. Factories roared again, farmers replanted, and across the airwaves, Roosevelt's fireside chats gave people something far rarer than money: hope. The machine had not been rebuilt, but it was breathing again. Recovery came not with celebration, but with exhaustion. By 1935, production was climbing again, but the scars ran deep. Millions who had lost everything could not forget. Every saved dollar was guarded, every risk distrusted. The Great Depression had changed not just the economy, it had changed the American soul. New Deal programs stabilized banks, revived demand, and restored a measure of dignity through work. Yet unemployment still hovered above 10%. Private investment remained weak, haunted by memories of collapse. Roosevelt's reforms had stopped the bleeding but not healed the wound. Ironically, it wasn't policy but war that would finish the recovery. As Europe slid toward conflict in the late 1930s, America's factories came alive once more, this time producing weapons, not cars. By 1941, the unemployment rate had fallen below 2%. The lesson was brutal. It took the demands of global war to restore full employment. But out of the wreckage, a new kind of nation emerged, one that had learned that markets alone could not sustain dreams. The Great Depression had ended, but it left behind a country forever wary of its own success. The New Deal saved capitalism, but it also changed it forever. The government had become the guarantor of stability, the lender of last resort, and for many, the new source of hope. Freedom and intervention were now bound together in a delicate, uneasy truce. Yet every rescue carried a cost. Deficits soared, dependence deepened, and the expectation that Washington could fix anything became permanent. America had survived by surrendering part of its economic innocence, the belief that markets could govern themselves. The Great Depression did not end capitalism, it institutionalized it. It made prosperity a managed affair, no longer a gamble, but an arrangement between the market and the state, a miracle preserved, but never free. In the decades that followed, the scars of the Great Depression shaped everything: policy, politics, even identity. America rebuilt its dream, but with caution woven into its DNA. Regulation became vigilance, growth became survival, and behind every boom lingered the memory of a crash. When the markets fell again in 2008, the echoes of 1929 were unmistakable. The same greed, the same denial, the same shock. Yet this time, the collapse did not destroy the dream entirely. It reminded a new generation what their grandparents had learned the hard way. Prosperity is never permanent. Confidence is never free. And every miracle, in the end, comes with a bill.